Hi folks, and welcome to this, the first video in a series on using GraphQL with Sitecore. In this series, we'll cover the what and the why of GraphQL on Sitecore. How can we get started with GraphQL, and how to configure your Sitecore solution to then enable the GraphQL API. We'll use the UI to run a query, and then go on to create item and search queries. We'll then build on those to do more complex queries using fragments. We'll look at search queries and faceting of search results. Quick look at integrated GraphQL, and then some more topics besides. So first, let's take a look at what GraphQL is and why we might use it with Sitecore. Then we'll get started configuring a default Sitecore installation to deliver the GraphQL API and run our first query. So what is GraphQL? It's a query language for your API, and it's also a server-side runtime for executing those queries using a type system that you define for your data. In Sitecore XM, that's going to be templates and items. Why would we use it? Well, it's a very flexible way to query data. You can shape the data to suit your needs and also reduce network round trips from the client by creating one big query rather than lots of little ones, which makes it ideal for headless solutions. It's also very extensible, and you can abstract other APIs and data sources behind the scenes and return that data to your consumers as what appears to be a coherent data set. So GraphQL on Sitecore, you say? Well, it's been available since 2018 with JSS. It provides the server components that power headless rendering and JSS. And the services that sit on the Sitecore content delivery server to deliver that API for both of those consumers are essentially the same thing. So when you go and download headless rendering services or JSS server components, you're downloading the same thing. On the server, the DLLs, the configs, everything is identical, and the API is the same. It's just a different consumer. And yeah, so this lets you enable Sitecore data via an API on the content delivery server. It's also part of Sitecore Experience Edge for XM, which is a more newcomer to the Sitecore space. It's a Sitecore hosted platform that lets you publish your data to a Sitecore hosted environment that exposes your content via APIs. You access those APIs from your consuming application, be it written in using Next.js or a mobile app or whatever you want it to be. You query that data using GraphQL. So we're going to be seeing a lot more happen in this space in the near future. And GraphQL is becoming increasingly relevant if you are doing Sitecore development. So it's really worth your time to get into it. It also comes with Sitecore Management Services that powers the Sitecore content serialization and the CLI. Now, I won't be covering Experience Edge, but if you want to learn more about it, then I highly recommend watching Alistair Denace's symposium presentation from this year, which digs deep into using the Experience Edge GraphQL APIs to access both Content Hub and Sitecore XM data. Spoiler alert, they are different. As I said at the beginning, this video is the first in a series that I'll be releasing on using GraphQL with Sitecore. Today we're just going to look at getting started. Then in future videos we'll dig into more complex topics. So today we're going to be installing the necessary components to run GraphQL. What the configuration we need to make to our Sitecore installation after we've installed it. How do we access the API? And running a query in the UI. So let's get started. Okay, so let's install the components that we need to run the GraphQL API. To do this, we'll just jump over to Sitecore Downloads, and you can get the server components from Sitecore JavaScript services or from headless rendering. As I mentioned earlier, these are essentially the same packages containing the same DLLs and configs, so take your pick. We'll grab this one here, JavaScript Services Server. We'll download that. It's a pretty quick download, 1.5 meg. Then we'll jump back to Sitecore, do an installation. I've already installed this previously, so we'll get some alerts saying, do you want to overwrite stuff? So we'll just work through that. All right, upload. Cool, upload. Great. Okay, and I'm going to install, accept the license, JavaScript Services Server 1501, And let's install, work through some of those warnings. Yeah, so I've still got some configs left over. You'll probably get some warnings of your own, but it depends. If you've just installed a vanilla install, just go right ahead and say yes. If you've got custom configs, well, that's up to you. And it'll want to overwrite some items. In this case, I've already installed these. You may get some slightly different warnings. Right, our installation is finished. It's asking us to restart as always. Let's do that. So the installation has created for us a new config folder, and that's in app config Sitecore, and it is services.graphql. And in there you can see we've got 1, 2, 3 configs, and these 3 example config files that we can use. This first one contains the core configuration for Sitecore and GraphQL, and it defines some crucial settings: require authentication. Got some stuff in here about query complexity and how deep that query can go, and we can override those with patches if we so desire. We've also got a content configuration, which talks about the actual schema itself. In this case, we've got an example one called Helix content, which exposes items based on these templates, which is pretty familiar to you if you're doing Helix stuff. And it also defines what queries will be able to be run against this schema, in this case item and search, which is a couple of things we'll be looking at later. There's a system content schema as well, which talks about giving access to all of the templates. We probably might not want to expose this schema to everybody, but it's got it could be used for, say, content serialization or other things. And we've got definition from additional queries, Sitecore item and search that we saw, but there's also sites and templates. Then we have these 3 examples here, and we can use those to create a config to expose data in the form that we choose to expose to the GraphQL API. And we'll get onto that shortly. So I've uncommented one of these example files by removing the .example, and let's go and have a look. Oh yes, you may probably say that I should have patched that, and you're right, I should have, but this is a demo. Okay, in here we have an endpoint node which contains a single endpoint called master. This name is completely arbitrary. It doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it Fred, it makes no difference. It's just a way to refer to the endpoint in XML, but you cannot have duplicates with the same name. So if you were to create another one called master below this, you'd get an error. And we also have this URL, and this is the URL for our API. It's the endpoint. That's the URL that we call from our code or from the browser to query the GraphQL API. So there's a few other config elements in here. Let's just copy that URL and take it for a spin and see what happens. Okay, we paste that on the end. In reality, this would probably be your content delivery server, but this is a local standalone, so let's just paste that there. We just paste our URL. Boom, authentication required. Okay, so, well, we're missing an API key is the problem here. So if we knew what it was, we'd go sc_API key equals blah, right? Obviously that's not correct. So what we need to do is first go and create one. Okay, to do this, we go to System, Settings, Services, API keys, and you can see there's none. Create the API key type, and we'll call it GQL demo. Now, second naughty thing of the day, I'm just going to put stars in here. The docs will tell you not to, and they'd be right. But this is a demo, and we're just trying to get things working. I'm just going to save that. What we need to do is take a note of this value here, because that item ID is actually our API key. Now if we jump back to here and do this, still broken. Oh, perhaps I forgot to publish it. Of course, that'll get you every time. So let's do that. Publish that. Boom, published, and hopefully things will work. Still broken. Why would this be? Well, there is a blog from Mr. Jan Blooming, thanks for that, Jan, that tells me that what I need to do is actually update this value here from system service to public service. Who knew? Well, very helpful. Yes, we want to, yeah, all right. Yep, okay, save that. That's going to recycle our system, so let's just take a pause. I'll go and recycle, and then we'll go back and try it again. All right, Sitecore has recycled. Let's refresh our API and see what happens. Much better. No query was provided, exclamation mark. Well, that's good news because that's saying our API key is correct. We've got our system configured. It's just we don't have an API query. So there is a nice little UI. Sitecore's GraphQL implementation comes with this nifty UI where you can try out your queries in quite a user-friendly manner. It's available on the /UI path just below your endpoint. So if we were to just go here, do this, we would behold the magic. God, look at that. Okay. And so let's try that out. I'm just going to jump over and grab a query for us to try, and I'll be right back. And here's our example query. Because we're using the out-of-the-box default Sitecore install, we've got just this one home node here, which is pretty familiar to everybody. The only thing missing is a woman holding a phone. So let's have a look at this query. There's a couple of, well, first of all, the UI. There's three aspects here that we need to look at. First is our query window. The second is the query variables window, which is where we can pass values, parameters into our query. And the third is this query results window over here. You can also see the docs and look at the schema. And let's just have a quick look at this. In the next video, we're going to go into more detail, but we've got the query keyword and then an arbitrary name for it. I call it my query. We've got this parameter data source, which is a nullable string. And then inside there, in those curly braces, we've got a data source, which is pointing us to the actual element that we're retrieving. And we're saying its Sitecore path is $data source. Looking down here, we can see data source is being passed in. This is the name, and the value is /Sitecore/content/home. So you can see by this brace here and this brace here, that is wrapping all of this query. And in there, we're going to pull some fields. ID and name, they're going to come straight out of the default schema. Title and content are fields, they're custom fields, they're not Sitecore default ones. So, you know, we can actually, like if I was to start typing name, and you can see I can get display name, ID. So the schema help in this is very useful as well when you're preparing your queries. It's a really neat way to put these together before you use them and just try things out. So I'm referencing title and content, and I'm saying there's a field with a name title, and we're getting its value. Got content, field name equals text, because look back here, this is strangely enough called text. And then we can just run it. And you see here, we've got the resulting data is wrapped in this data element. And then in there we have the data source. We've got its ID. You notice that it's been converted to uppercase, no curly brackets and no hyphens. There is the home, the item is called home, and we see our two fields. We've got Sitecore Experience Platform. Yes, that's correct. And we've also got this HTML. And there is content. P style equals line height. You notice it's escaped, of course. So what have we done? We've installed the JSS server components. We've configured our Sitecore solution and created an endpoint config. We've created an API key, and we've looked at how we can then access the GraphQL API. And we've had a look at the Experience Graph Browser, or the UI. And I think, you know, that's probably enough for this first video. In the next one, we'll come back and we'll start taking a bit of a deeper look at how to construct these queries. So thanks for your time.